How you doing? This is Sean McVeigh with Sean's Outdoor Adventures. This is my youngest baby girl right now. I've got 4 total. And I just finished this live stream that you are about to watch. And I forgot to hit record for the first couple minutes. I was just going over some bits and pieces, but we're going to pick up the live stream right here a couple minutes in. One of the things I've been doing is I've been recording these and then posting them usually by the next morning, and the reason for that is, as I can see right now, the live feed going out, sometimes the internet service isn't super awesome, and so it could be a little bit slow, and the video that I want up long term on my page, I want it to be better quality, and so I'm going to upload this in high definition, good audio and everything. Sometimes when the signal's not strong, the audio cuts in and out. So if you're watching this, or if you're watching this live right now and you walk away and you come back in an hour or two to watch the rest of it, it might not be there. I don't know, because I'm going to try to replace it with the recorded thing. The other thing I wanted to say is I want to give a special thanks to those of you who just tuned in, who got the text message. Let me cruise right over here for a second. Get my camera hand over here to help me out. Those of you who have texted the word watch to 313131 to get an update, got your update and clicked over here and you're on the feed. And so I just want to thank those of you who are using this. Looks like my tripod's not set up properly. So anyway, if that's something you're interested in, that is available to you. And I want to thank BowTech for setting that up so that we can get more people alerted. You can also just go to my YouTube channel, and I've been hosting these and setting them up well in advance. So you can go on my page and click to be notified when this stream goes live. So now I want to get into the meat of tonight, and I want to say thanks to God for giving us this opportunity to be together once again. And so the topics for tonight, as I said before, is how the moon and the sun impact ear movement. And I just remembered, I am a one-man show, so those of you who are new to tuning in, I just need to give you this real quick. I'm managing my Sean's Outdoor Adventures YouTube channel. So if you want to comment or ask a question that I might be able to see, please go to Sean's Outdoor Adventures on YouTube and put those in the live feed there. And also wait until I ask for the questions, because here's what happens. People are chiming in, they're saying, hey, I'm here, how you doing, whatever. And there's all kinds of people posting. And if you throw in a question now, by the time I get to the question part, it'll be buried and I probably won't find it. What I will find is those most recent questions. And if you post a question, please put a question mark at the end. It just helps catch my eye so I know it's a question and not just somebody stating something. So please, if you have a question, go to Sean's Outdoor Adventures, spelled with it S-E-A-N. Oh, this is the bad marker. Let's switch over to black. S-E-A-N. So that's how I spell Sean. So Sean's Outdoor Adventures, and you'll find me there on YouTube, and you can find this stream going out live. That's where you want to put your questions, and that just makes it easy for me to get your questions so that I can answer it. If by chance you do ask a question and it looks like I'm not getting to it, post it again, because again, it can get buried. And lastly, if for some reason I don't get to a question or you think of one later, go ahead and go to this video when it's posted live or posted on my YouTube channel and just put it in the comments. And I try real hard to get back to everybody that comments. So thanks for your patience with me giving that announcement. And that reminds me of one other announcement that I really need to make, because I'm getting lots of questions on this. So those of you who've been following my channel, following this live show, you know that I'm doing a challenge hunt. I've got 12 guys that I'm taking out on a map reading challenge. And BowTech is going to be awarding a BowTech Range 6 to the winner of that challenge. But they're also going to be giving one out to you, the viewers, who are tuning in. And people periodically ask me, who know how to, can't get my words out. So you have to vote for one of the guys in order to get your name in the mix to be drawn for that BowTech Range 6. And people have been asking me, how do we vote? And I just want to reiterate again, we're almost in September here, so about mid to 3/4 way through September, that's when the map reading challenge is going to start to air. So it'll be airing on my channel, and we are going to have a web page set up for these guys, sort of like a hero page. You'll get a little bit of info on them. There's going to be, their videos are going to be embedded, and you'll be able to watch the videos on those guys, and that's where you'll be able to vote. You will be able to vote later in September. I will give updates when we're getting closer and when that gets all set up. But I don't want the voting to begin until those episodes begin to air, so that you can see these guys first and decide, who do I really want to push through to the end to win that BowTech. And just by voting, your name gets in the mix. So, okay, let's get into the sun and the moon and how that impacts deer movement. And I want to say that I'm coming to you from the northeast region of the United States. Most of my hunting is in the northern region. So Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York. I hunt, in Illinois, I've hunted in Iowa, but you're talking about that same stretch across the country, and so the deer movement behavior, especially as it relates to the rut, is going to be fairly similar. There are going to be states maybe higher or lower than that could have variations to what I'm going to talk about as far as dates of when the rut might kick in and how the sun and moon play into that. Yours could be off a little bit. In fact, this past week I was talking to a guy who is in like southern Florida. Now in Pennsylvania where I'm at, all the bucks are still in velvet, and he had a picture of a buck no longer in velvet and was in full rut chasing does, and that was last week in like southern Florida. So, and he also said it's really strange in Florida because it can really fluctuate depending on where you are in the state. It could be totally different. My point in saying that is some of these environmental factors that impact deer movement and the rut can change depending on where you are in the country. So I'm going to be giving you this information based on the northern region here, like Pennsylvania, all the way out to Iowa, that kind of thing. But although the time increments may change a little bit, some of the ways that the moon and the sun will impact the deer collectively will be similar. So let's start with the moon, actually. Let's just start with that. So let me draw. I am quite the artist, as you've already learned. Let's say that is the Earth right there. Give it the old E to remind us that is the Earth. Now, we know that the Earth pivots on its axis throughout the year as it rotates around the sun, and at the same time, the moon goes around the Earth. So let's say that's the moon going around the Earth. Now, there's two ways of looking at how the moon can impact deer movement. First, I want to talk about just movement in general, and then I want to talk about the rut. Traditionally, like when I was growing up, what you heard is people say, when the moon is full, the deer don't move. So let's say this is a full moon right here. And let's say the day before, the day of, and the day after the full moon, people said the deer don't move because they just move during the night. They don't move during the day. And that research has basically been disproven. There's been a lot of research on it, and I'll just throw this in right now. What a lot of the research shows is that the real significant environmental factor that impacts the deer movement is the temperature more so than the moon. Because there's been like data tests that have been run over longer periods of time, and some like hunting seasons, the best deer movement was when there was a full moon, or when they were harvesting their deer. And other years it was the opposite. And so they began to look further into data, and they saw that actually what really mattered, what got the deer in front of the hunters, was the colder temperatures. So that's one way of looking at the moon. So when you go out this hunting season and you think, oh, it's a full moon, I'm not going to see any deer tonight, that's not necessarily going to be the case. It could be more related to the temperature, but again, let's think about environmental factors. And a human being, a hunter, we can throw in the mix as an environmental factor. You are going into their environment and causing a factor in how they're going to move. So environmental factors, human activity could really drop the deer movement off during daylight hours. It could be temperature. It could be related to the moon, all these different things. But really what a lot of the research I've done is that the moon does not play as big of an impact as a lot of people traditionally thought when it comes to full moon or not full moon. So that's one element of the moon that I want to bring out. But here's another. Let me just, let's just draw a couple moons here. Again, hold your questions until I'm ready for them near the end. Now let's say that this is the moon on its trajectory for the day. Here, here, here. Let's even draw one down here. Okay, let's say you, the viewer, lives right here. That's your house. Hi. So some of the research that I've read actually points it in a different direction, that peak deer movement is going to be when the moon is straight up above you. Right there. That's peak deer movement time. So let's say, and when I first was like researching this, I never paid close attention to the fact that there's so many times where you see the moon out during the day. Like after I read that, I started to look up in the sky, and I was shocked at how often, like, it's 11 o'clock in the morning and right there's the moon. You know, I just never paid attention. And so the point is, when the moon's straight up, even if it's 11 o'clock in the morning, that's when some of the research was saying that's when the deer movement's going to be good. And there have been times where I would go out of my house, look up, okay, I see the moon, it's almost straight up. We're probably entering that peak window of deer movement. Let's say it's 11 o'clock in the morning. I go driving down the road past some farm fields, and there's a doe and 3 fawns standing out in the field. I'm like, well, you know, maybe it's right. Now, let's put let's put a caution here. You know, then you could drive by that field every single day and the deer could be out at that time. So you gotta like do a little more than just the one time. You also could be going by right after someone's dog ran them out of there. So, you know, when you're gathering your own data, be prepared for variables and don't always just lock it in like this is definitely it. I hear so many hunters, especially your old school hunters, they're very set in their mindset, like this is what it does to the deer, and that's that. Period. But you have to leave room for variables and flexibility, in my opinion. So again, let's look back here. So some of the research says when the moon is straight up or straight down from your location, those are peak and preferred deer movement times. And that can hold true in some situations. And I have, you know, a handheld GPS. I use it tremendously in my hunting, and it gives you like peak game times of the day, the peak ones and the secondary ones. And most likely it's referring to this and this right here. And I would say, honestly, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, I think that would probably have more weight when you're dealing with fishing than with hunting, although it can impact the deer. There's a lot of other environmental factors that can impact the deer stronger. And I mean, I get hungry around the same time every day. And I'm not going to say it's the exact same with deer, but I imagine it's probably similar. You know, you eat at certain times of the day, deer sit down, chew on their cud and everything. And after a while, it's like, okay, I'm ready for some more. And that's a time increment that goes by. And deer have to chew on their cud. With their digestive system, after they eat, they got to go sit down and just chew on that a while. It's necessary for their digestion. And so, and then that window comes back open where they get hungry again. Again, there's other factors than just the moon that are going to impact that. Let's say they were late in getting to bed to do that because they were getting bumped around by a predator, a dog, a human. Well, that's going to postpone when they can get through all that and be ready to eat again. So there are so many factors. And my point to you is you can look at the moon and where it's positioned in planning out your hunt. But remember, let's say you only have one day to hunt. And let's say the best times of the day to hunt are dawn and dusk. And during dawn and dusk, the moon's here and here. Well, that's, you know, in this study or this opinion, that makes it the worst time for deer movement. But guess what? A lot of times they're hungry, and so they're moving. And so again, a lot of times the moon, it can play a factor. Deer can get up early when it's up here or down there, and that could play a role. But I would say, in my opinion, it's not as big as people sometimes make it. And that's just my opinion. There could be people watching this right now who are pulling their hair out and angry and disagreeing with me, and that's okay. I've been hunting for 30 years. I've made a lot of observations and I've read a lot of stuff, and this seems to be the case. I think the moon can have a slight impact, but I don't think it's like one of the big factors that we need to look at to determine, am I going to have a good hunt? What's going to help is the wind, your temperature. I think you playing the wind right, the temperatures being your favor, that's going to help. I know going into the fall, in the regions where I hunt, you're getting in the northern area, the deer have to put on fat, which means and their winter coat, which means they get hot quicker when the temperature's hot. And you walk around with a winter coat when it's really hot out, you're like, ugh, I got to go sit down. Give me some shade. It's not that different. The deer are needing to seek some cool when their coat's on and it's too hot, and so they'll stay bedded down if they can longer in the day, or if they might bed down in an area where they can browse easily, so they can get up, browse, and sit back down. And you're a hunter way over here, is 700 yards away, and you're set up, and this deer's getting up, browsing, laying back down, getting up, browsing, laying back down, waiting for it to be really dark and for the temperatures to drop off. So now let's talk about how the moon impacts the rut. So going back, I don't remember how many years now, I started to listen to some podcasts and predictions on when the rut is going to be. And there was this one guy, he was adamant. He's like, I've been studying this for 5 years, gathering data, and the rut is going to be in full swing this year early. It's going to be October 27th. And I know a lot of people were like, okay, we're going to be in the stand. Bucks are going to be chasing October 27th. And everybody I knew was in the stand, end of October, and the deer were not moving at all. And the reason why? It was hot. It was too hot. And so again, the moon was not the deciding factor. The temperature was. So when you're planning your hunts this year, if you hear people making rut predictions based on moon, hey, I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm going to ask you to observe what you observe, but also check what are the temperatures at the same time period when they made that prediction. So now that transitions me into talking a little bit about the sun. Let me just erase this for a second. So we've talked about the moon, how the moon impacts deer movement and the rut. And I want to talk about how the sun's a bigger impact. The sun is the impact on the rut, really. Because when bucks shed their velvet, in the regions that I hunt, it's because the days are becoming shorter. And that whole process kicks in their testosterone, that velvet, hardens up, dries out, cracks, comes off. And we're moving into things because the days are becoming shorter. Now, again, where I live, there's a huge element of survival involved here. The winters, at least growing up, and sometimes still can be very harsh. And there's areas in the country, like up near the Great Lakes, where you get lake effect snow. So snowfall and food availability becomes very critical when it comes to the life of a deer. And so in the springtime, that needs to melt off. Your food sources need to regenerate. Your forage needs to start popping out. And in order to help sustain the deer herd, it has to be timed to where those snows are melting back and those food sources are becoming available so that the does can feed the fawns and the fawns can thrive and grow. If that time period of the fawns being born is too late in the summer, you're going to get into the fall. They're not going to be developed enough when those when those snows start to come, and it's going to be hard for them to survive. And so there's this window of maximum ability for the life of the deer herd to sustain, and that is really predicted by the sun because in the wintertime with the earth the way its axis is, at least where I live, the days become shorter, but the earth is also on a different, the axis is tilting. And so I can see this very easily. I have a huge hill or mountain behind my house. And during the summertime, the sun's up here. But in the wintertime, it is barely over the crest of that mountain. And my house is usually very cold throughout the winter because it gets very little sunlight. And that plays a role in this whole thing. So I can observe very easily how the axis of the earth is changing throughout the year, and that impacts the vegetation and growth. Now, being that the optimal time for fawn birth is basically the month of May, that puts it back in what is the optimal time for the breeding to take place. Now, the research that I've read, and this is biological stuff done by, Penn State University has been doing some really cool studies, GPS collaring deer, tracking the deer throughout the year, and gathering a lot of awesome data. It's not just based on, hunters making sightings or not, or you or me, we're limited on the amount of data we can bring in. Even if we're running trail cameras and stuff, we're getting a snapshot at a moment, at a place. But with GPS collaring, they can see the whole movement of the deer throughout its life. It's really cool stuff. So, Google that, search that. You'll be stuck there for days just reading up on some of the stuff. It's some cool stories. But within that, they've observed that it is the sun and the time of year that impacts the rut the most, and there's a bell curve with the rut. So this is our timeline here. Beginning of hunting season, end of hunting season, and it basically goes like this. And this is going to be our peak right here. See if I can hit it here. So this is basically the curve of the rut cycle of the deer, with this being the peak where most does, not all does, there's does over here coming into heat, there's does over here coming into heat, but the bulk of the does between November 12th and 18th in my region across the country, that's what the data from especially with the GPS collar research, has been showing us. Not related to the moon, but to the sun, because the sun, throughout the year, changing on the axis and the Earth's orbit and everything, it heats up the Earth, it causes growth, and that is really what is impacting the ability of the deer to sustain, for it to live and thrive. Those fawns need to be born when the mother can really pack on the pounds to produce the milk and feed the fawns. It also is important that it's when the vegetation is coming out, because where I live, there's a tremendously large black bear population, and black bear is a major predation on deer, especially with the fawns. I mean, the strategy of the fawn for evading predators is the camouflage with the dots, and they don't have an odor, but they also just sit there. I mean, how many of you have ever been out walking around in the spring and you walked right up on a fawn and sometimes it didn't move, sometimes it hopped away. If you're an adult bear, you can run down that fawn, and if you just walk, where the does like to bring their fawns for that time period of the year, and you just roam around there. Bears just roam around. They got time on their hands. They start finding the does and picking them off. I know the other day, my wife was taking the kids out for a walk down the street. They saw a group of 5 does, no fawns. No fawns. We got a lot of bears. And so it's very possible that some of the bears that really thrive in this area they know where those does take those fawns and they pick them off. But they have a better chance of living when all that vegetation's up, when all that green's up, so they can hide. Again, it's all part of the whole plan, or the natural cycle of the deer for survivability, and it needs to have, if those fawns are born too early, there's nowhere to hide. They're done. If they're born too late, as I was saying, again, they could run into troubles getting into the fall. There's been times where I've seen fawns that are like looking not even close to losing their spots, and you're in October. That's going to be tough for that fawn to survive. It just doesn't have what it needs to survive a tough winter. It doesn't have the body weight, the body fat. Well, I mean, it could, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be easier prey for predators. And so there's that pocket we need. And in order to hit that pocket, we need the bulk of the breeding to take place here just within the context of the life cycle of the Earth. So that's why your rut is usually going to be here. Now, last year, I had the fortune of pulling an Iowa tag and getting to hunt out there. And I'll tell you, it's a lot different than where I hunt in Pennsylvania. Like where I hunt, there's areas that I hunt where there's 5 deer per square mile. There's also areas I hunt with about 15 deer per square mile. And I like those because they're, a lot easier for me to be successful. When you don't have many deer per square mile, it really pushes you to develop your skill. And I've actually recently talked to some people out that live out that way, and they say they get upset if they don't see 40 deer in a sit. And when I hunted public land in Iowa, I went in blind. I was seeing about 15 deer a day, and the bulk of those, almost all the deer I was seeing were bucks. And it was in the 3rd week of November, So it was basically right here. I went out in this window, like usually it's that second week of November, first or second week of November people hit. I went out in the third week. My buddy John Ortlieb, you've seen him in some of my videos, and he's been going out on outfitter trips for many years. He's had a lot more success in the third week of November rather than the early weeks because we've been seeing climate changes over the past decade. It's been holding warmer in Novembers than it has in the past. Again, there is that temperature. It's holding warmer in Novembers than it has in the past. And so John was seeing greater success later in November. Now, I was out here. Last year was a record-breaking year for the state of Iowa. It was the hottest recorded November in history since they started recording temperatures. And the whole week, I ended up harvesting, here, let's take a look over here. I ended up harvesting this buck right here the last night of the hunt. I was like, yeah, if a 120-inch 8-point comes by tonight, I'm just going to take it because I didn't spend all this time and energy to go home with nothing. I'm sorry. And so that deer gave me the shot. I took it. But what happened is the whole week that I was there, it was still really hot. And I watched with my own eyes bucks not interested in the rut at all. I passed on a lot of deer that week. I was passing on 130-inch 9-points and 8-points. I mean, a lot of really good deer. I was trying to hold off for an older deer, like a 5-year-old. And I had an opportunity at one. It was going behind me. You might have seen the video. I snort-wheezed at him. He was going behind me, and I had the video camera arm right here. I'm like, ugh. I tried to move it a little bit so that when he came out, I could get a shot, and he saw me do this movement, and I blew it. But aside from that, I was seeing a lot of 3- and 4-year-old bucks, and they were just eating acorns all day. They were just eating acorns. They were probably doing a lot of their scrape checking and checking does at night because the temperature would drop off when the sun would go down, but it was just so hot during the day. They're like, nope, I'm bedding down. Again, so temperature played a bigger role. And if you've already planned your trip for this year, let's say you booked with an outfitter, pray for that cold weather to come in early November. If it's early November, you're here. I mean, this is a lot of does coming into heat. It's just your absolute peak time is here. And in that GPS collar study that I was reading, done by Penn State, the peak daytime deer movement for bucks was November the 9th. So right before the peak came in, it was really ramping up and they were cruising looking for does. So right before the rut hit peak, that's when the most bucks were on their feet during the day. Again, not related to the moon at all, but just this whole cycle of when those does need to be bred so that the fawns are born at the optimal time in the next year. Okay, start getting your questions ready. In a minute here, I'm going to head over to my laptop and I'm going to try to get some questions. So if you don't have a question, this is a time where we would please stop making comments in the feed. So that just helps me answer questions, and make sure you put a question mark at the end. It helps it pop out. So this is our curve. If you want to take a snapshot of it, this video is going to go back up. You want to grab your phone and take a snapshot or whatever of the screen, you can go ahead and do that. And that's just something that you can carry with you and make your plan. This is all about hunting strategy. We're getting strategies put together now for the hunting season, and a lot of you are planning your hunts in the rut or planning rut hunts. Some of you are going to another state during the rut. Again, don't overlook that early November because look, a lot of those are going to be coming in just in general, but your absolute peak is here where the majority of the does are in heat. And in fact, this peak moment might not be the best time to hunt because a lot of the bucks are going to be locked down with the does since there's so many in heat. And then just coming off of it, that's when they start breaking off and searching for the does again. That's a good time. So right before, right after that, maybe focus in on those as an idea. Okay, so I'm going to grab the camera hand and swing us over here, and I am going to just lower this a little bit, and because I'm sitting right here with this laptop, and I'm going to put it on my lap today, see if that helps a little bit here. And let's see, I just saw a question mark pop off the screen. Let me see if I can scroll back up. Okay. Hey Sean, question, what is the best tactics to kill a doe? Need tips, please. Okay, if you are doe hunting, food source. Does are not afraid to show up at food sources usually in daylight, in general. And this goes for public land too. There's so many times I'm hunting public land that, you know, I'll have does showing up. It's the bucks, a lot of times they're the ones that are showing up later to the party. So if you're hunting does, and in whether it's early season, mid-season, late season, focus on your food sources. In my region of the country, white oaks, acorns. Acorns are a key food source throughout this time of the year. Acorns are already falling. They started falling, let's see, where we are, almost a month now. In a lot of places I've been scouting, acorns, they always start falling in July throughout Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, the places that I'm walking around the most that time of year. And they're usually the premature ones. And as we move into October, we're going to get the good crop coming down. So focus on those areas that deer like to hit. If you have the opportunity to hunt crop fields, cornfields, baby, and don't always expect the deer to go from the woods to the corn. There's been so many times where the deer, especially when it's not too terribly hot, or if it's a cloudy day and they're not going to get beat by the sun, they lay out in that corn all day. And sometimes a lot of times I've hunted cornfield situations where in the evening, right when you expect deer to be moving, all the deer are coming out of the corn into the woods. So it can go both ways. But again, if you want to get does, focus on your food sources. And the evening hunts are gold for that. Morning hunts, the does are still feeding. They're feeding as much as they can to put on that winter reserve in my region. And it's even going to be that way down in Virginia, stuff like that. But they're going to be feeding late into the mornings. I've had great success with just the grunt call in early archery season. So if you're early season, don't be afraid. If the conditions are right, throw out a couple grunts. So many times. I've grunted a couple times and a group of doe come right to me. Okay, so let me see if I can find another question here. Scrolling down on my feed. A lot of people are excited about the season. Okay, ground blinds versus tree stands during rut. Pros and cons. This is Brad Huff. Okay, Brad. Always with a ground blind, especially a portable one, it's going to be if you can control your scent. I mean, one of the big real advantages of being up in a tree stand is the possibility of keeping your scent above the deer. And it's not always going to be the case even when you're in the stand. They're still going to wind you depending on how the wind is swirling or moving, things like that. But that's a key thing. If you can get in a ground blind setup where they're not going to wind you, it can be gold. I've had great success at times hunting out of the ground blind, but only when the wind is just right. And there's times where I'll have one window open and maybe another one cracked just so I can see over there. And the wind would be swirling and things like that. 1 minute it would be blowing right in my face, perfect, and the next minute I can feel it this way. And I can remember so many times looking out and watching the deer, and the wind would start swirling and poof, they're gone because they winded me. So there's a major disadvantage, especially in hilly terrain, with a ground blind. If you have a permanent blind, like a box blind where you can close all the windows and keep them closed until it's about time for the shot, great, because you're able to conceal your scent. And that's the whole key. So with your ground blind situation, it can be effective, but you need to have a way to keep your scent from reaching the deer. There's people that use ozonics. I personally have not used them. So I don't know. I don't have experience. I'm a little leery about it, but I'm sure there's people that would swear by it. But that would be one thing. So I prefer the tree stand because I have a better chance of keeping my scent above them in a lot of situations, unless the wind's blowing too strong and all over the place. But it also gives you a better field of view in most situations, especially when the leaves are down. I do have hunting situations, though, in evergreen areas where it's so thick you actually can't see when you're up in a tree stand, and you would be better off on the ground because you could see under that lower part of the tree. So again, in most situations I prefer a tree stand, but there are going to be some where a ground blind would be better. But always monitor how am I going to conceal my scent and keep it from getting to the deer. Okay, do we have another one? So you're stating November 9 rut. So yeah, I mean, if you're planning to like hunt for a rut, that's a good time to be in the stand. I mean, always the beginning of November, end of October, in beginning of November. Let me just go back over to our curve real quick. I mean, and this is going to vary from one area to the next too. I mean, just because the peak is over here doesn't mean the hunting isn't going to be awesome over here. Well, your tactics might be a little bit different early October. You know, you're going to be hunting more of like that pre-rut behavior. You know, they're not going to be aggressive. And then once you get into here, you know, your bucks are going to be more aggressive, more aggressively looking for does. So your tactics transition, more aggressive calling, and, you know, they might get on their feet earlier in the day. So you're going to, you know, be maybe hunting travel corridors a little bit heavier than just food sources where you're maybe doing back here. So again, there's a transition in your tactics. But the deer hunting can be great. The buck hunting can be great, especially if they're not getting pressured. But November 9 was the one research study that in my region, Pennsylvania, where the bucks were on their feet the most during daylight hours because they were just now getting into that excited time and searching for does. And again, I mentioned this in another episode. I got to keep an eye on my time. I mentioned this before that in the early season, like October, like right around Halloween is a great time. It's one of my favorite times to be in the stand because a lot of deer are just starting to get up and moving. But the week leading up to that, or even that time, sometimes the young bucks are a little bit ahead of the game and they're spooking everything all up and running the does off because they get into that excitement earlier. They're so excited to get, especially your year-and-a-half-old bucks really kind of getting into their first rut, probably with antlers on their head. I mean, they're just going crazy. And so don't confuse that either with the rut coming in your area. I mean, it could still be lagging behind. It's just those young ones are getting in there early. Okay. All right, Kurt. Spider-Man. Are you making a video about hunting bear? Or is this just for deer? This series has been focused on getting ready for deer season. I do have a couple videos on black bear hunting, but that's on my radar. I'd like to make another video on bear, and I'm actually going to do some bear hunting this year, so if I'm successful, I'll be making videos on that. Currently, I didn't have any of the live show that we're doing right now planned for bear hunting, but it's something on my radar. If you haven't seen my videos on how to hunt black bear, check those out. I know, who was it a minute ago that I just read his question? Madman Deal With It. I know he found me in the very beginning by my video called How to Hunt Black Bear. So, so I know that people have seen it. Okay, at least if that's who I think it is. During the rut, should you stick with the does, stick where the does are, or do you or go to the thick buck cover? If it's during the rut, I mean, the breeding usually happens in places where there's a little bit of openness, not in the thickest thick stuff. Because the deer have to breed, and it's kind of hard to mount a doe if it's like super duper thick and they chase each other. So there's a lot of chasing going on. So they're going to be more in your open areas and on the fringes. I love hunting fringes and cover changes. That's what I mean. So if you got a thick area going into an open area, a lot of times that's where your scrapes are going to be laid down. It's a great area to hunt. I would say if you're in the rut, you know, stick to areas where the deer can really be cruising around, not necessarily the wide open where they're vulnerable. I mean, the bucks are going to chase the does wherever they can, but I really like picking up on them in those fringe areas. They'll be, I mean, deer still bed down. You know, bucks are still going to bed down at times. They can't run 24 hours a day and survive without stopping. They got to lay down sometimes. And of course, a deer is going to prefer to lay down in a thick area where they're concealed. So I try looking at those fringes. I don't know what area you're hunting in, but okay, let's see. Mike, do you suggest holding off on hunting for buck until late October into November so deer in the area are not spooked? No, actually, I do not suggest that. My model is hit it hard the first week of the season because that's when, you know, a lot of times you can catch deer on their early fall patterns and those bucks are meeting up in bachelor groups during daylight hours. You can crack an awesome buck, even on public land early in the season. So my energy expenditure is heavy the first week if I can, kind of chill out a little bit, you know, hunt kind of more for does during this time of period, and then as we get near the end of October, boom, I crank up my energies again because that's when, you know, things start to get a little more excited. Sometimes it'll again, it depends on the weather. If you have a cold snap earlier than that, like middle of the season, give it a try, because if you end up getting a warm, late October or November, again, you could be in trouble, just like a lot of the people were last year in November who were hunting like out in Iowa, and the deer weren't really moving that well for them. Do deer travel by streams? Absolutely. Deer still need to take in moisture, and depending on what's going on, how dry the environment is, they might have to go to an actual water source. And when I'm scouting, I love walking stream beds and just cruising all the way up until I find the best deer crossings, and then I analyze the surrounding areas. Why are they mainly crossing here? Is there somewhere with good cover? What's the topography telling me? So yeah, check out water sources. You also have to check regulations where you hunt. In Pennsylvania, it's illegal to shoot a deer standing in the water. And so, you can't, if you're hunting near a water source, you can't shoot the deer in Pennsylvania while standing in the water. At least that's what it was before. I didn't read the book yet for this year. I got a little time to do that. But yeah, so check your regulations and, make sure that, you stay within those regulations. Okay, I got time. Last question. Are does smarter than bucks? That is an age-old question, pun intended. So the older the deer, the smarter it is. And I have buddies that hate with a passion those wise old doe because they bust them. They know how to blow up the whole area by standing too far out where you can't shoot, and they just snort at you and ruin the hunt. All the deer around the whole area know, don't come here because this deer is snorting its head off, and that doe knows what she needs to do to be safe and to tell the whole area it's not safe here. So it's really an age thing. The older the deer, the harder that deer is to harvest. If you harvest a 5-year-old doe, that's an accomplishment in my area of the country because there's not a lot of them with, the hunting pressure, predation. I live in Pennsylvania, and statistically, Pennsylvania has the most hunters per square mile than any state in the country. The last statistic I read, I don't know if that's still true. That was probably about a year or so ago, maybe, that I read that statistic. But that means there's a lot of hunters, especially a lot of hunters with guns, and that can really take a toll on the deer. I mean, because you can shoot a deer several hundred yards away. I mean, and that doesn't mean the deer wasn't super smart. But the point is, it's harder for the doe to reach that more mature age bracket. But when they do, man, it can be really hard, really hard to harvest them and really hard to trick them. So again, my friend, that is an age question. It's not that does are harder or bucks are harder. It's older deer are harder. If you can get the slip on an older deer, that's an accomplishment to be proud of, whether it's a buck or a doe. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank God again for this opportunity. I want to thank you for joining in. Next week, I was thinking about what am I going to do next week? I want to figure it out. And because I had like a sort of a game plan when I started this live show with BowTech, bringing me up to like right now. I kind of had it planned out to now. And my hunting season may start next week if my wife was in the hospital this past weekend. Thank all of you who were praying for her. Continue those prayers. She's dealing with a kidney stone issue, and it's not over yet. And so depending on how that goes, I may or may not hunt in the opener in Maryland next weekend. But my point is, getting into next week, I wanted to kind of have a topic for it. And the topic, I've been wanting to do a video on how to ask permission, to how to gain permission to hunt private land especially. I do a lot of public land hunting, but I also have hunted plenty of private land, and I see so many people just kill their chances because of the way they're approaching the whole thing. So next week, I want to talk about that. I want to give you what I consider best practices for gaining permission to hunt someone's property. So I hope so much that you are going to tune in next week, and I thank all of you again for tuning in this week. Until then, take care, God bless, and I will be reposting this on my YouTube channel after I get it rendered. It takes a long time to render and then upload because these episodes are so long, but it'll be up tomorrow. Thanks again for tuning in. God bless you. Have a good night.